Good afternoon and welcome to the Emerging Tech series of the Leadership and Insurance podcast. This is the podcast where we speak to technology executives, founders and leaders. And today I'm very lucky to be joined by CTO Loris from Loro Inusrtech. Loris, welcome. How are you doing?
Thank you, Gavin. Doing great. Happy to be on your podcast. So thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you. Thank you. It's great to have you on. I'm glad that we managed to get it. And it's always very rare, but it's always great when we get to meet in person, which you and I did at ITC Barcelona, which was a lot of fun.
Yeah, it was great. And thank you for stopping by at our booth. Did not expect that, but it was good to see in person.
Well, I did try and get your attention on the booking app, but we won't go into that booking app. It was, it's temperamental to say the least.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I love meeting you guys. Loved hearing about what you're doing and within the realms of specialty insurance. And there's so much to unpack, even from that meeting that we'll get into later. But before we get into it, always a great place to start. Let's start a little bit about your career background. How did you get into tech and into the world of Inusrtech?
Yeah, sure. So about the tech, that goes back in the 90s. So 1995, more or less. I was living in Milan in Italy, and I started, coding these websites. That was the era where a webmaster could do it all. From the design, the back end, the front end. There was no such thing as a front and back separation. So it was all about putting your animated GIFs, the stolen MP3 you downloaded from Napster, and create that flashy homepage that you would update every single day. So that was in Italy. And shortly after, I started studying computer software engineering. And that's when I set up also a nightlife entertaining website. And that was exciting because it was pre-2000. So, and it was amongst the first platform to leverage social contents before even Facebook was around. So that was a great experience. Learned a lot. It was my first entrepreneurial adventure with a company set up, and that lasted about 6 years. Then I moved on to Barcelona. I love this city, so I decided to move there, and I worked for a few months in the e-commerce industry, so payments online and all that stuff, until I bumped into that company, insurance company. Tokyo Marine HEC, by the way. And I was completely surprised by this atmosphere. I was seduced straight away by the incredible sea view of the office, the vibrant international workspace. Everybody was young. I thought, wow, that looks really cool. So I might as well give it a try. So I started as an analyst, a developer. That was like 14 years ago. And after a few months and years, I became head of the IT department for the financial lines in Barcelona. And so that's where I met Peter and Diego, ex-colleagues who are now my partners, co-founders. So they had a lot of experience. They have a lot of experience on the broking and underwriting side. And the three of us had identified a problem we wanted to fix. Basically, it was distributing insurance products online was extremely expensive and a very slow process. So that 3 years ago, quit the job and started Loro Inusrtech with Peter and Diego.
Nice. Such a journey. Moving to Barcelona and the kind of classic tale of falling into insurance there. Just coming across Tokyo Marine and being seduced, as you say. I think I'm starting to see a really common theme as someone that's new to insurance and absolutely fell into it myself, But yeah, great journey. And probably for the listeners, it'd be good if you could, you kind of alluded to it there, Loris, but who are Loro Inusrtech and what is the mission?
Sure. So Loro Inusrtech, it's a US company. So we incorporated the company 2 years ago in the US. So that was back in the days when we still were under COVID lockdowns. So most of the countries were still suffering or under a strict lockdown. So we we could not basically go to a notary. Diego is living in the US, Peter in Malaga, I'm in Barcelona. We had some initial investors all around the world. So we could not tell them, go to a notary and sign the contract. So we had to pick a place that made it easy. And that place was naturally Delaware, so US based.
Yeah.
So that's where the company is from. And what it is, we have a very simple mission. We want to be able to take any insurance product anywhere in the world online immediately with no upfront investment. So that's our mission. And our customers are typically insurance companies or MGAs. So we want to empower them to be able to do these things. That's our mission. Yeah.
And one thing that kind of jumped out, I don't have the document that you did send me away with when I visited the stand, but the pricing model that you guys operated in the very beginning, there was struggles with minimal viable product and all the kind of classic things when you're building something from the ground. But the pricing model is one thing that you guys really not struggled to communicate, but yes, had difficulty with. Would you mind explaining what that looks like and why
Sure.
it was so problematic in the beginning?
Yeah, sure. So, one of the problems we want to solve is not only expedite the process of launching a new product online, but also reduce or remove altogether the upfront investment. So at the beginning, what we said is, first thing is, whoever thinks about launching an Inusrtech, you'll get their pricing wrong. Then you'll get back to it and you'll sort it out over time because you'll figure some things out. So initially, what we said was it's free to start, so there's no upfront investment, and that's still the case today. However, we had a scale of pricing that was basically for the first $1 million of premium you transact every year, you pay 5%. And then it went down as you transacted more. But we completely inverted that so that the small players that only have a book of $5 or $10 million would not be penalized. You know what I'm saying? So we inverted that and said, okay, look, for the first 100K per year, you pay 0. Then it goes up to 1%, up to 25 million, and then down to 0.1%. So this would enable us to say that Loro is completely free until we can prove you that there's a benefit for your company to use it. So we're not charging anything unless Loro is making your distribution successful. That's the idea, is that you won't be paying anything.
Yeah. And was there elements of dubiety on that, or did investors love it? I'm sure there was probably a little bit of split opinion on it, from the...
Yeah, we tend to like to say that it's free and, it's the only free Inusrtech online. But when you speak to an investor, they go, hey, that's not what I want to hear. So how do you make money? So we make money basically by reaching that 100K of premium, and then we make 1%. And we're very confident that our companies will like it, and they're just going to stick to it. Because as a matter of fact, we're not even asking for a commitment in time of using Loro. If they don't like it, they can stop using it at any time and just leave for another solution. But generally, it was very well received, especially in the emerging markets, because, they have smaller budgets than probably companies in the US or in Europe. But for us, the tricky part is, if a company does not pay for a service, there is no sense of urgency to start using it. Yeah. So this is where there is a little bit of a debate. However, we think we nailed it after that first mistake over a year ago, and we're gonna just keep that pricing for the time being.
Yeah, that's great. And the area that you focus on, specialty insurance, is an area that we're kind of constantly seeing more and more growth in. I just wonder, what are the kind of common trends that you're seeing within specialty insurance, and why is it so? Why are certain elements of specialty insurance so underserved from, insurance companies, larger companies, like, yeah.
Yeah. So the first thing is, why did we focus on specialty insurance? It's very simple. Peter and Diego, they were in specialty insurance. It was their bread and butter. So they really know the industry. So when we speak to an insurance company that does specialty insurance, we speak the same language and they love it. So that's one thing. And the other thing is, it tends to be an underserved segment, because very often their books are fairly smaller than, bigger lines like motor or life insurance. So it's not worth investing the millions of dollars that would require, to put in place a policy admin system. So they kind of leave it on the side, or these lines inherit a tech that is not really appropriate. So basically, most of the companies we speak to that deal with specialty insurance, they still have no systems at all. That's the truth. Or they get recycled tech that is not adapted to their needs. So that's why we think it's a sector we can tackle better than others, because Peter and Diego came from that industry. Plus, for a company selling specialty insurance, using Loro would be free to start with, as opposed to spending huge budgets. And I would say that also specialty lines require a very specialized knowledge, so tend to be more expensive underwriters. But if you're doing very small accounts, you can't be spending a lot of time analyzing all your accounts. So you really need a system to go through that huge volume, low premium. And this is, again, where we can shine and give a solution to these companies.
Interesting. And you just kind of going back to what you said before answering that question, where you guys feel like you nailed it in the last year or so. What was the pivotal moment for you? Or what was what was that moment where you went from a mere idea that seemed like it had legs, seemed like it had product? Where did it go from that to a viable product in the insurtech space, and why?
Yeah, sure. So I think the first question is, we all had a slightly different idea, Peter, Diego, and I. And it's after a lot of brainstorming that we eventually came to the idea that a no-code solution would really speed up things dramatically. We can literally take a company online in 2 days if they have all their documents ready. On our side, it's that quick. But the hard part, I would say, is, what is an MVP? What is, according to you, what is minimum viable for a company? And this is where it's very easy to get it wrong, because we tend to think that we can guess what customers want, but only Steve Jobs really can do that. So what we figured out is, when we started demoing the system to companies, we had stuff like, for example, crypto payments or subscriptions. No one actually wanted that. So we quickly removed it. And we started focusing on things that were really the core of the product, which is take an insurance product online through a network of brokers if needed, and just make sure all the documentation is dealt with automatically and distributed, and you can collect the payments. Just stick to that and make it work really well. And then, so we focused on that MVP. And what happens is, as you demo the system to companies, they all have different requests. And this is where we can tweak our roadmap and say, okay, that request really makes sense. So we're going to put it like in top of the line and make sure we can develop that in next print. So yeah, MVP is a very broad concept. It's easy to get it wrong. When you work for 2 years on a product and you're finally ready to show it to customers, and you start demoing it, it's when you realize that really it's not totally ready, but you're missing one thing. You did one that was not needed, and so on. So yeah, it's an iterative process.
And do you think because we're seeing a lot of it now, low codes, quick implementation, allowing operators to launch products within days and weeks, as you say. Do you feel like the insurance industry, whilst it's a great thing to have, do you think it's actually ready for it in a way? Like, supercharging these incumbents with, or other insurtechs or insurance businesses. Do you think we're at that stage where they can and are adopting it the way it should be?
I think it's changing very quickly. 10 years ago, they would, a traditional insurance company would not engage with a startup of 5 or 6 people. Definitely not. They wouldn't. Now, we are having conversation with huge players. However, their requests are very different from small MGAs. The due diligence process is much different. But I do think that a low code or no code solution brings a lot of benefit, because insurance companies are not software companies. Some try to build things in-house, and it tends to be very expensive, very slow, and they can get it wrong easily. So that's why I believe they're starting to move to these providers. And then the thing about low code, there's a huge spectrum. Low code can be 5 weeks or 2 years. You've got some BPMs that are low code, but really you need to be a great expert at building tools. This is why we chose no code, because it enables companies to not dedicate IT resources to implementing the system. So with Loro, you don't need an IT person in-house. You may need a business analyst to set up your products, but no IT is needed. However, where I believe there will still need to be some change on the insurance side is expectations. Very often, I think insurance companies, they have a whole list of requirements, and they want to meet them all without compromising on any of them. And this is where they end up choosing to do it on their own, and it's complicated. Typically, I would say integrations are the failing points.
Yeah,
it's where they spend a lot of money, a lot of time, and sometimes they just can't do it, which is why I believe they simply should accept to avoid it and maybe use an API and to centralize information with business intelligence tools for reporting, but keep tools separated. I think this is where integration sometimes is just maybe the cherry on the cake that could be avoided.
It's so interesting when you kind of touch on businesses walking away and then deciding to go their own way and use that closed system. So at Loro, of course, from our chats, and you can just, by the way, the business is set up, it's all open source technologies, and the contrast between closed systems at large incumbents and then your open source technology, I think, is always super interesting how those conversations go. The impact that it has on scalability, the impact that it has on cost effectiveness and efficiency within an insurance company. Like, for you, what are the main reasons as to, or what are the kind of trends that you see in terms of why they actually do say no? Because for me, they should just be saying yes every time, surely.
Why they say no to what?
Like, say no to the integration piece, say no to it doesn't quite work, we're going to do it our own way, thank you though, and they walk away.
Oh, okay. Well, first of all, I think the closed systems tend to be the choice for huge corporations because they're not software shops. They cannot, or they might not have the skill sets to set up platforms from scratch. So they tend to go with closed systems because they can leverage customer service, and that goes along with the licenses they pay for. Whereas if you go with Node, for example, well, there's no customer service. You have to get a developer that knows how to code with Node, and you build your own backend and so on. This is why they go with these choices, and also because they tend to be huge companies like Pega or Salesforce. They're huge. They're listed on the stock market. So if suddenly their contact point leaves the company, they're gonna have another one coming in, and somehow this they like that. which is the opposite of a startup. However, being a startup, we chose open source because, you know, it's these are the best tools around. If you're going to build a new web app today, it's going to be based on Node, Angular or React, Mongo or MySQL. These are the typical choices that, you know, even an Airbnb or Gmail are actually using. So yeah, we chose that, and it wasn't even, there was no doubt about it. There was no doubt like, should we use Pega or Node? No, it was more like, should we use Node, PHP, Python, or Angular, or React? That was more the reasoning. Yeah.
And you also, I thought was really interesting, switched from AWS, initially went from a technology infrastructure perspective to GC, Google Clouds, due to that more user friendliness. I think it's always a question on a lot of businesses' minds, you know, what tech stack do we go with? What infrastructure do we go with? Where do we set up? Like, do you have any kind of tips or any insight into why getting that right from the beginning can be such a key component to, you know, the success or failure of your infrastructure? And
Yeah.
what was it for you that really stood apart from the two?
Yeah, so this is a key component, the infrastructure. So you've got like the developers, the infrastructure, the location of the team. Well, the infrastructure, if you get it wrong and you figure it out too late, it's very expensive to move everything to another provider. However, we started with AWS because it's kind of the leading brand out there. If you think about infrastructure as a service, you think about Amazon. So we started with Amazon, but we were very quickly overwhelmed with the name of the services. So for example, Google Cloud for the storage service, it's called Cloud Storage. Amazon, it's called S3. It's like, why? So you've got all these codes and you have to figure out like, what's EC2, what's S3? Whereas with Google, so there's a very simple interface for the storage, for the SQL service. So we kind of liked it. And because we could not afford yet a full-time person dedicated to DevOps, we thought we really need a service that is easy to set up. And then you can forget about it because Google deals with it. Google is in charge of scaling the services, the security, the networking, the load balancing, and all that. So that's why we changed. We were very quickly overwhelmed with Amazon, and we moved to Google. And by the way, we had a grant of 100K in Google, so that was really well received. You know, 1 year without paying for the service, that's amazing. So a year passed, and we're still at Google, and we think we're going to stay there for the time being.
It's interesting to me because a couple of years ago, Google was always seen as the risky cloud because it was open source to a degree. It's less established like Azure or AWS, and I just find it very interesting now that we're seeing, you know, companies like Loro and Inusrtech partner with insurance companies, and all of this stuff has Google running through it from the infrastructure perspective. Again, I think it shows how much the insurance industry is coming along and catching up with everyone else.
Yes, I agree. I mean, you know, the choice for Google was it's kind of natural. I mean, Google is Google, so you kind of trust their security, and as well, you know, we run a quarterly pen test, and just to make sure that things are secured. And so far, it was pretty good, the results. So we have no reasons to be concerned about Google's capability of securing our service. Excuse me. So and yes, they have a new insurance sector, Google. So
all right, we
think it was the right choice, really. And you know, to be honest, Google, Azure, and Amazon, they sell the same thing. And I would trust the three of them. But just again, on the user interface and the user experience, Google enabled us to not hire a full-time person dedicated to DevOps. So that was very well received. That's the real reason why we're going to stick to it right now.
Nice, nice. And one thing I wanted to kind of cover as well, because I find that again how the team is split up. You know, the founders where you originally were based. You know, you're in Barcelona and companies in Delaware, and then this, as a startup tech function, you guys chose to set up in Mexico, influenced by a number of decisions, you know, again, which we've spoken about, but just for the listeners, you know, it'd be great to hear what was, because again, it's just something that when I'm speaking to founders, you know, when on these podcasts and when we're running searches at FinPro, like it's one of the key components, you know, location of a team, how are we going to work, technology stack, infrastructure, and then of course overarching that, what problem are we solving, you know, the minimal viable product, etc. But you chose to set the team up in Mexico. You're based in Barcelona. How has that decision impacted things like efficiency and overall work environment? And I guess the start of my question is more, what was the kind of thinking behind it?
Sure. Well, you know, there's no coincidence really. My wife is Mexican, so I happen to know Mexico and Guadalajara, where the team is based, a long time ago. And every time I went there, I was kind of struck by the talent and the excellent workforce that is there, specifically on the software engineering side. So I always thought, if I ever build or start up a business, this is where I want the team to be. And so why Mexico? First of all, it's North America. So it's easy to move around from the US to Mexico. You know, there are all these trade agreements. And secondly, the language being, you know, the country right next to the US, almost everyone in Mexico speaks really well English, plus Spanish, obviously. So we speak their language. I know their culture, and these two things really help building the right environment, you know, harmony, and you can make sure that there is a proper communication going on. Whereas, you know, and that's why I did not want to go down the, you know, the path of going to Eastern Europe or Asia, because I don't know these places as well. So it would have been harder for me to set up the right environment in the team. Plus, you need to see the team very often. You can't just, you know, hire someone remote and never see them ever. This is why I chose Mexico. But then within Mexico, Guadalajara, so that when I go there, I can be with them and we can have some events, you know each other better. And it's the only way you can make sure there's a proper communication, and you can earn their trust so that they can become more autonomous. You know, they can tell you that you're wrong sometimes, and that's great. So that's why I like that culture in Mexico, and I think so far it played out pretty well. And so we're going to keep on hiring in Mexico if possible.
Very much has a shared work culture with your vision at Loro. And as you say, well, your wife is Mexican, so you're probably there quite a lot. Exactly. And so a lot of potential. But yes. I think, again, and it's not a question specifically to Loro at all, it's more when we have leaders like yourself that are building teams in quite far away locations, you know, it's always about empowerment. How do you emphasize empowerment through a remote culture? I know off camera you said you were traveling out there for 6 months at a critical period of Loro's growth, but generally empowering the team, you know, creating that, something that comes up a lot as well in terms of my conversations anyways, that psychological safety of a tech and engineering team and how they can innovate and be heard and be trusted. Like, how do you kind of foster all of that from Barcelona, for example? Do you have any kind of methods, or is it just constant kind of contact? Like, what's your kind of strategy there?
I think there are many factors here. The first one is to not just focus on their skills, on their professional skills, but also on their soft skills. So when there's a team, for example, we ask them to be involved in some things that in huge corporations they wouldn't be. So, for example, when we hire someone, they are involved always, because we want to make sure there is a fit with a new hire. We want to make sure they're going to be willing to work together, that it's going to be pleasant. If we suspect that the person we're about to hire isn't compatible and that there's going to be some clashes, we prefer not to hire. We would rather wait a bit more and make sure that it's always a pleasure to be together. That's one thing. But of course, they need to be excellent at their job as well. And if they are, because very often, if I'm looking for example, a QA job or a back-end engineer, I want them to be much better than what I know. Otherwise, I want an expert. So if you hire a great person and they're compatible with the team and you let them speak out and you don't micromanage them, then it's very likely that you're going to reach that great environment. We don't even control when they work, what time, where from. We don't care. As long as they deliver a good quality of code regularly and they meet their sprint deliveries, well, that's more than enough. If they work 20 hours instead of 40, I don't care. It just works. It just works. So that's how we do it. And I think it's really a lot about empathy. Don't ask to do things you wouldn't do yourself, and all of that. So
yeah. And in Mexico, did you have an office to go into, or is everyone in Mexico fully remote? They're all fully remote.
Yeah, so that it was funny because I think you asked in the past, like many companies go back to office, but we can't go back. We never had an office because we set it up during COVID times. So there was not an office. You were not allowed probably to have an office. So we don't have one yet. There are no current plans on having any. However, we are getting some shared space to gather.
Yeah.
But I don't think we're going to get an office anytime soon. And that's for the tech side. Then, I'm just talking about the tech side and that's Mexico, because the rest of the team is, as you said, distributed between the US, Spain, now even Africa. We've got a team expanding in Africa as well to tackle the emerging markets down there. But yeah, office right now is not our priority. We believe that if it works with that one, we'll continue this way.
Yeah, no, it seems you never fully build a culture. You're always building it, always evolving it. But from a remote perspective, like you said, I highlighted that people are now going back to the office, and it's all underpinned with people aren't as productive at home and people are lazy, and I just hate that. I hate that view on it, because the data is there to show that people can be way more productive. I guess it's just down to the individual. As a remote worker at FinPro, I take umbrage to those comments, but I think building a culture is very difficult to do it fully remote. But it seems like something you guys have got spot on to this point. Like, I guess as a finishing note, reflecting on the journey so far at Loro, what advice do you think you can offer other startups that are aiming to establish a positive, company culture and taking into all the things that you've considered, like location, technology? What's your kind of top 3 things that you would advise to kind of put you on the spot?
Okay, well, I would say be very careful when spending money. Don't. So even if you raise money, we did raise some money, but we're not spending it crazily. We're not getting an office. So don't spend if it's not absolutely required. That's my first advice. Try to save every penny. You're going to need it at one point. Secondly, I would say same thing for hiring. Don't overhire. Only hire if it's absolutely needed. And if you do hire, make sure you get involved and you create a cohesive environment where people feel safe to challenge you, and that they can trust you. If you manage that, it's going to be a great journey. And third, I would say be patient, because it takes longer than what you think. So example, I mean, converting a lead to a customer, it takes longer than what you think. That's so patience. And this is why don't spend money if it's not needed, because if your timeline gets extended, then you need you will need to spend money when you didn't plan for it.
Yeah.
So that's my advice, and just make sure you focus on your product. Just build the best product ever, and clients will come.
Amazing, awesome, Loris. Thank you. What a great way to end it. Really appreciate you coming on. It's been a pleasure, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you very much, Gavin. It was a pleasure. You too.
Thank you.
Have a great day.